Hi, good afternoon, Ignatius and Mama Leila. I'm sorry if I'm butchering your names. Glad to see that you're joining the Breakaway session, and I'm looking forward to having some good discussions about the case studies and just unpacking it a little bit. I think we'll start shortly. Just waiting to see if we have other participants joining us. I think let's give it another 2 minutes and then we'll kick off. Hi, James. We're just giving it another minute or so and seeing if there's anyone else joining, and then we'll start. Okay, I think we can get started. So welcome everyone. I'm very glad that you joined the session, and it will be really nice to discuss some of these case studies and systems thinking. This is a collaborative session, right? So if you want to use the Q&A function, you're welcome to do that. Otherwise, you can just put up your hand and we'll unmute you and then we'll just get the conversation going. And the idea is really to unpack systems thinking and look at these case studies through that lens. And I want to encourage you to do that and to really think about what we've learned and use these new tools that we've learned to unpack and untangle these case studies. So how are we going to do this is we're going to take about 20 minutes per case study. And I'm going to just give some guiding questions. Hi, Samuel.
Hi, good. Just visiting your room. You can carry on.
Sure. Thank you. Take about 20 minutes per case study, and then in the last 10 minutes or so, we'll just reflect back on it and take what we've discussed back to the bigger session. So just some of my initial reflections before we start is, I think the session on systems thinking has really challenged me in two ways. Firstly, in the way that I think about problems. It's good to understand that it's complicated, to understand that there's stakeholders and to understand the policies and targets and objectives. But I think what we tend to miss is to really think about the perspectives, right? How do they all fit together, and how important expectations are of the various stakeholders. And I think the other way it challenged me is I'm a very much a logical, rational person, making bullet points. And I think just thinking about it in a whole new creative way as it broadened my perspective as well. And I would love to hear your feedback on that as well. So maybe let's start with the first case study. And maybe we can just... So that was the youth center. And I would that Eugenie presented. And the first kind of discussion point that I would like to kind of bring up is to ask, what did you hear about the complexities arising from the interrelationships or the absence thereof between the different stakeholders. And I think what we can maybe first do is to think about who the role players are and then think about the relationships between them. So yes, please jump in and let's hear your thoughts on that. By using the system thinking approach, when we think about the stakeholders, their perspectives, their needs, and yeah, would love to hear some thoughts. And I want to encourage you. It's really a session to collaborate and to build confidence in giving our opinions and debating. And Ignatius, fantastic. Give us your thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, trying to. I don't know much about systems thinking besides what I've just heard from the previous session, right? But I think looking at any societal problem or community issue, it's about this how the problems are framed, right? Because when you try to come up with a solution, it's all dependent on how each stakeholder within that space sees the problem. So yeah, that's how I think about it. I think it also understanding the underlying story also helps you identify the various components, not necessarily just people, but the issues that what's this the various parts of the problem, not necessarily people, but just the dynamic, I guess, for lack of a better word.
I think you raised some really interesting points. I think the context is really important. If you think about a policy that you want to implement, you need to think about the context in which it is implemented, right? Because if you don't understand the context or you misplace it, the policy, which had good intentions and was theoretically a good policy, can completely fail, right? I think they use the ETOL system as well as an example. And I think the youth center as well, it's such a good initiative, it's such a good project. And then there's this mismatch between the stakeholders and their views and their perspectives. And I think there's so many bottlenecks and delays, and it kind of just becomes a very much a tangled problem. I would like to hear some of the other colleagues' views as well in terms of the relationships. Where do you think the relationships between the stakeholders, so when you think about the stakeholders, that would be the funders, the service providers, the owners of the project, the users of the project, which would be the youth. How do we see their relationships? Do we see that it's conducive, that it's constructive, that it's open for collaboration, that it's inviting productivity? Or are we seeing some sort of a mismatch here in terms of expectations, in terms of trust, but that's broken essentially? I mean, if they're on their third service provider, so that kind of signals that the relationship there is between the service provider, for example, and the funder or the planner seem to be somehow not very constructive, right? James, Mama Lena, I don't know if you have any thoughts in terms of the interrelationships between the stakeholders, and is there anything that we're missing in terms of the relationship and the communication between those stakeholders? It would be nice to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. I think it seems like there's a huge disconnect from what was presented to us. And this seems to be a continuous problem throughout all kind of state enterprises and state projects, whether they're at, I think, state level or at local level. And there isn't an integration. There isn't an integration between, as you say, the funders and the constructors and the people themselves that are supposed to be the owners of the project. At the end of the day, it seems like there's just the this is what we're going to do, and this is what we've done. But there's no working with each other along the way, and having to understand what those structures mean to that community, and that they aren't just to what's envisioned or what will look like a good city. There's also, I think, the continuous problem of isomorphic mimicry that we face, where things just have to look good, and at the end of the day, we're not sure if they're working or not. I think there's, outside of this case study, there's the issue of the taxi rank in Mfuleni municipality, I think, that was built for something like 20 million rand, and it's never been used because the lanes are too small. And the taxi drivers and the taxi associations don't want to use it because, well, they weren't consulted and they weren't spoken with, and the roofs, I think something like the pillars are too low for their taxis, so it's not a safe environment for them, and there isn't enough space for commuters and for business. So at the end of the day, I think we see a lot of these projects where they're just there, and they're just accounted for as having a project done, but without actually saying, okay, but what are the outcomes of that project? Yes, it's a good output in the sense that you've got it done, but are people actually using it, and is it something that's actually working to the benefit of the people? And could you say that you're getting good returns on your investment? Or
Yeah, wow, thanks. That's some really, really good points. And I think you actually already touched on kind of the second question that I was going to ask. Where is there a mismatch or a difference in the needs? And there's obviously diverse perspectives from, say, the owner and the user and the grant funder, but there's a mismatch in terms of their needs, right? Like you say, with the taxis and projects that are built, and it's a great output, but they're just standing there and they're not being used because, in essence, it was a project that did not necessarily serve the needs of the user. And I think that speaks to that mismatch, and I think you framed it really well. And then another discussion question is in terms of, what did you hear about the complexities arising from power play issues, conflict, and inability to manage them? Sure. Yeah, that's a bit of a tough one, because it seems as though there's miscommunication all over. But I don't know, James, I don't know if you have any input in terms of conflicts and inability to manage conflict when we think about this first case study and the youth center. And here I'm thinking about, using 3 service providers or people not getting paid. That raises massive conflict, right? And what does that tell us in terms of this project and in terms of how to manage these relationships? If any of you have input, please jump in. I see I've scared James by pointing him out. That was not the idea, but it is a collaborative session, so it's good to chat and speak about these case studies. I think maybe let's move on to the second case study, which was on the recreational park, which is also, it's a great initiative. Creating, like he said, the Eastern London beach is not in a great condition. It's not comparable to other beaches, and the idea of the project was to kind of turn that into something good. But yet again, they see all these problems and misguided expectations. And I would like to pose the question again, like, what do we learn here from the stakeholder interrelations? And I think what stood out here for me is maybe the stakeholders that was unanticipated, like the construction mafia. How do we think about that? Because it's, when we think about the system thinking, I think this may have been a blind spot, because we think about stakeholders and their perspectives, but are we thinking about stakeholders that was unintentional or wasn't supposed to be there in the first place, like the construction mafia, and how that also comes into play in terms of that inter-stakeholder relationships? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. How do you manage stakeholders that wasn't supposed to be there in the first place? And how do you manage those relationships?
Sure, I think it's like what Dr. Ramokgopa said, that at some points you find that the people that are called construction mafias are people that are actual members of the community. So it shows that there's then a disconnect between government departments locally and understanding and knowing the people that are able to provide services within their own communities. And so it's quite an obvious thing. You see it now even with what's termed the xenophobic attacks, that whenever you find people coming into a country or into a community to come and work, there'll always be those frictions that come about. And so it goes back to also going back to government having to understand, local government having to understand the communities they serve and who are these people, what is it that these people can offer us, so that when they're speaking to these companies to come and serve, they know that they are able to connect them to a good network of people that they already have. But outside of that, when it comes to construction mafias that you weren't expecting in that sense, then I think that becomes a very difficult one to have to work around, because then it becomes an issue of how do you communicate with these people and how do you manage them to ensure that the project continues at the end of the day and they don't hinder it. Does it involve police and all of that? And in terms of what the professor was saying, though, I think there's something very significant that he said there about the late payments, and that also speaks to a huge problem that I think Treasury has spoken about, of paying service providers late and what that does to projects in terms of service providers that are still new and service providers that don't have the financial backing that the bigger service providers would then have. And so even in this instance where you then have the municipality doing something, but then without the ability to quickly disseminate funds, you're unable to actually pay the people that are doing the jobs, and they also have people that they're paying. So there's a whole lot of incentives that go along the value chain of this thing, starting from the person at the bottom that's laying the brick, to the person at the top that's approving the payout. So yeah.
Thanks. That's some really interesting points, and especially about the late payments as well, right? If you pay people late, it breaks trust, and it breaks it kind of breaks the relationship, right? And if there's these breakages in some of the relationships, it creates these bottlenecks within these projects and additional delays and whatnot. So thank you for bringing that up. I think that was a really good point. And it also, in terms of what you said about, the small firms doesn't have necessarily the financial backing that the large firms has. That they can't afford to not get paid. And I think that was a good point, and how we should think about the entire value chain and the stakeholders across the value chain, and how do they get incentivized, and what are their needs and their perspectives. Maybe we can go on to the next question that speaks about, let's see, the different stakeholder needs. And I think, once again, that you've already raised the point in terms of the small businesses. Their need is to get paid on time, right? In order for them to deliver a service. But what can we say about the user's needs in this case, and maybe the funder's needs in this case? I don't know if you have any ideas.
Yeah, I missed a large part of the second case study session, but what from what the previous speaker just said, right? It comes down to understanding each other. I think it was echoed in Dr. Ramkhopa's session, right? In the sense that how you view a problem really matters, and how you view the next person's needs really matters. For instance, uh, I mean, before Dr. Ramkhopa's session, I wasn't thinking about it that way, in the sense that these could be like legitimate uh, needs by the community, right? And when you come in as a developer, not having done your consultation, right, you end up concluding that, oh, okay, this is just like a syndicate of sort trying to extort money out of me. So that's how you frame that particular community's need, or that group of people's needs. So, and from a developer's point of view as well, is understanding that you have shareholders, if there are, or you have project sponsors that need a particular project delivered or product delivered. So I suppose from an outside perspective, they both have legitimate needs, but how they perceive each other could be misaligned. The community might see the implementation or the delivery of the project as just another tenderpreneur scheme where people are eating and we're not getting anything out of it. So it depends on your point of view, right? Of what's happening. Thanks.
Thanks, Ignatius. That's a very good point. I think perception is key. Expectations are key. Like I said, a policy can be as good as it is, or a project can be as greatly intended as you want it to be. It really depends on how it is perceived, and how the stakeholders perceive their own needs, and how they perceive others and other stakeholders. Right? It's almost kind of takes me also back to inflation. It's all about expectations, right? What do people expect? Everything is expectation based. Everything is perception based, and I think that's something that is omitted a lot of times in policy making. When policies are made without keeping in mind who the stakeholders are and what is their context, what is their perspective. I see we have Jade and Neil joining, and Bulelwa as well. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts in terms of how we think about these case studies, and we think about the stakeholders and the relationships and the conflict between them. And if you want to make any inputs. If not, what we can maybe do is, I want you to, we are going to give a bit of feedback to the bigger session, and it would be great if you can give your input. So we are going to share a link with you. It's a Mentimeter link. So it makes a little nice word cloud. And what we want to do is, the first question is, we want to ask you, what was the main insights that you have gained on systems thinking? And I think Fritz will share that with us. So if you go to the chat box, you'll see there's a link. If you can just press on that link. Ignatius, I see your disclaimer, and no worries, you gave some really nice input in anyway, so thank you for that. Yeah, so if everyone can click on that Menti link that Fritz has posted in the chat, and just answer the first question. which basically, if we think about the two case studies that we've listened to, what are some of the main complexities of service delivery that we've experienced? What are the insights that we've gained about these complexities? And if you can give us a few key words, that will be really great, so we can make a nice word cloud that I'll also share with you, and that's what we're also going to take back to the bigger session. That would be really great.
Fritz, just to answer the question that you have in the Q&A section, I think it isn't fair to blame the developers, of course, and the strategist, but I think that it's a matter of communication once again between how the strategists also communicate with the man on the ground, because at the end of the day, you're providing something that you're going to expect the man on the ground to have to look after once you're gone as a developer or as a strategist, because you don't live in that community, or you aren't going to use that service. So, and in terms of the public giving a little, the public should, and I think that also speaks to the problem within civics education within our country, and within getting communities to engage and communities to participate in such projects, because then that would give those communities that ability to be able to say that they are getting involved. And that also goes beyond just calling people to a meeting, but preparing people for that meeting, and so that people are able to actually give inputs and not just get there and have to listen to what's being said and take what's being said. So yeah.
I think you made some really nice points there, and thank you. I didn't see the Q&A question, but I think you answered it really well. I think there's a misalignment, and it's difficult to play the blame game, and I think that was one of the things that Samuel also mentioned. It's difficult to think about, who should be blamed when there's so many different stakeholders with so many different perspectives and so many different needs. But I do think out of touch, I think Ignatius also made the point that, the local government needs to understand, and I think it was you, Mama Lady, needs to understand who they are serving, what are the needs of those they are serving, and not just want to build some nice projects, but really think about, who will this be serving, and what are the needs of those. Thank you so much for the nice input in terms of the word cloud. I'll share it shortly with everyone. I think we have a second question, which Fritz, I think, will post again in the chat. And the second question is, again, when we think about the two case studies, what are some of the possible blind spots and unintended consequences of the interventions in these case studies that we could have missed? And for me, it's kind of these unintended, or those that we're not aware of, stakeholders, such as the construction mafia. It could be a major blind spot. It's a stakeholder that you didn't take into your equation when you think about the various stakeholders and their perspectives and their needs. Let's see. I am going to share shortly with you the results of our word cloud. I see we haven't gotten any responses yet for the blind spots. It is a difficult question to answer. I see payments. Yes, very much so. And maintenance. I think that is also a big one. I think, so much focus is on building these nice projects and very little effort goes into thinking about the after project maintenance and upkeeping. So I think that's an excellent point. Let me share my screen and I can maybe show you what we've got so far. So for insights gained, I see the main point is communication, and I think that's spot on. I think without good and solid communication, one would not know what the perspective is of the other stakeholders. So I think that is absolutely key. And doing that strategically through stakeholder engagements, through sessions, councils. So yeah, I think that one is a very good point as well. And I see we have commitments, we have engagements, planning, consultation, transport. That's an interesting one. Very great. And I think, let's see what we have with blind spots. It's maintenance, registration, stakeholders, ownership. That's very great. Is there any other points that any of you gathered from this all systems thinking? I think for me, it's like I say, it challenged me because I'm all about points and bullet points, logically and rationally making notes, and drawing pictures is not something that comes naturally for me, but I do think it kind of just, it's a new perspective on thinking about a problem. What is your thoughts?
Well, I think it helps one deal with complexity. I think that I know there are technical differences between complexity and complications and all that, right? But I think it helps you understand that things are interrelated, and even though you might have factored in all that you can factor in, there might be things that come up that you're not aware of. So I think that's my big takeaway from that section.
Great points. Bothwell, Zama, Neil, I don't know if you have any takeaways. What was your thoughts on systems thinking kind of approach to analyzing problems and systems?
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, sorry, man. I got your question, but I've just joined it, so I don't have much input right now. But yeah, but I did catch the first session of the systems thinking. But what I just took out of it was just that we are so one dimensional. Most of the times when we look at situations, we tend to want to understand it from our own point of views, which is usually biased towards our background, our training, and all of that. But when when um, when you now listen to this sort of systems approach, you start saying, okay, what's the perspective of the other viewer? When we actually engage and tackle these projects, do we have the buy-in of all stakeholders? Yeah. And usually we overlook things like that, but it's actually integral to the success of projects, for example. So, simply put, yeah, that's what I've caught on, and it's got me thinking. It's enlightened me on my approach when I look at various projects in industry. Thanks.
Thanks. That's really good points. And I completely agree with you. I think one tends to think that people behave rationally or logically or the same, and it's not at all the case. And when we think about only our own view and our own subjective way of thinking about things, it can be quite biased. And I think that is a very good takeaway in terms of just considering the perspectives of other stakeholders. How do they see it from their perspective? Is very important when we think about any problem. And I think that's a very good point. Neil, please come in. I think you're not unmuted.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Okay. So, unfortunately, I'm part of GTech and I had to attend some meetings. And I operate in the human capital space. So, it was quite interesting to hear the switch between yesterday's conversations, where, it was really about policy and everything but people. And today, I'm hoping that the perspective then changes to people realizing that your stakeholders are people. And you need to understand people, you need to understand the complexities that they operate in, not only from your own viewpoint, because if you biased in terms of your outlook, you will have a solution that is fine for you, but not necessarily for the stakeholders you're trying to service. And I think one of the key things that most economists need to take away from this is that we are servicing the public, and with that in mind, is the outcome something related to the end of the project and closure on the project, a pat on my back, or is it that I walk away from a project that has meaning to the stakeholders that it was intended for? And I think if we start with that in mind, we might find that we start working on our projects and our infrastructure decisions a lot better, more aligned to what we're trying to achieve, from a government point of view, from a national point of view. So I think it's actually a wonderful session to open up people's minds in terms of, do I just see the numbers, or do I see the people behind the numbers? All right. Thanks.
Thanks, Neil. That's a really good point. Especially economists, they get focused on the numbers and the policies and the black and white, and we need to understand and remember that it needs to be people centric, because it's people for who this policy is being set up, right, or this project is being built. So thank you. It's a really nice reminder. Thank you everyone for joining the session. It was really interesting to hear your input and your perspectives on systems thinking and the case studies. And I look forward to the next sessions coming, and I hope you're going to stay for the rest of the winter school. Thanks. Bye.